Hello and welcome to Rainbow History Class, the queer and trans history that you don't get in school. My name is Rudy Jean Rigg.
And my name is Hannah McElhinney, and we are back with another episode.
I really didn't know where you were going to take that sentence. I feel like you always keep me on my toes when you open the show.
You know what? My goal for the year is to work out a non-awkward way to open a podcast episode.
I can't wait for you to find a way. But until then, I'm happy to bear the brunt of the awkward vibes. It's not that awkward. I'm just like, yeah, and?
That is like the definition of awkward.
Oh, okay. Well, clearly I don't get that. Nevertheless, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Not sure, Hannah, what you're going to cover, but before we do get into it, if this is your first time listening, welcome to class. Chuck us a follow so you don't forget to listen every single week. If you do follow us and have been enjoying listening to our dulcet tones, might I suggest that you leave us a wonderful 5-star review on wherever you are listening. But aside from that, if you do want to join our community, you can head on over to our Discord, join our Patreon. We do, in fact, have a free tier for that as well, so you can access some of that exclusive content for $0 buckaroonies. Or if you've just somehow come across us on one of the audio platforms or on YouTube, you can of course find us on Instagram and TikTok.
At Rainbow History Class is what you're looking for. So I have a really juicy gossipy story for you today.
Ooh, okay.
It's got everything. It's got high stakes. We are talking defamation, irony, and celebrity cancel culture.
Are you talking about Cars too?
Yes.
It's a good movie.
It's got it all.
It's a good movie.
No, it is, in fact.
Oh, Ratatouille would have been a better example.
You know what? Ratatouille checks the same boxes. You might actually say that Ratatouille is a modern retelling of this story. It is a wild tale.
Okay. Oh, very funny.
Yeah.
I know where you're going.
Yeah, Ratatouille is the modern day Oscar Wilde. Ratatouille is so much better. This is a big story and I'm really excited to tell you because there is so much about this story that gets left out when people talk about Oscar Wilde, right? But it is, I don't know, it's really dramatic. Before we kick off, I do want to do a little content warning because we will be throughout this episode discussing sexual assault and non-consensual sex with a minor, and that might not be the type of content that you want to listen to today. So if so, that's totally fine. You might want to find one of our other episodes to listen to. So recently, Fiona Harvey, who was the Scottish woman who identified herself as the real person that the character of Martha in the TV series Baby Reindeer was based off, announced her intent to sue Netflix for defamation. Did you see that?
I have seen that, yes. But the only stuff that I've seen about it was whether it was actually her or not.
Yeah, I feel like given that this is a live case, I want to, say that this is recorded. We recorded this at a time when the only information that we had was that Fiona Harvey had intended and has announced her intention to sue Netflix for defamation. If, for whatever reason, something new happens with that case, wanted to flag that this is when we performed it.
We're not performing.
We're not performing shit when we recorded it. But it was interesting because that's what made me start kind of looking into this case and looking into defamation in general, which might not sound very interesting. It might sound a bit dry or academic, but I promise you it's juicy.
Are you promising? I was almost going to be a media lawyer. Defamation.
Okay, so I'm talking to people that aren't you. You're the kind of person that reads the fine print.
Yes. Defamation is really interesting. More people should get into defamation.
Defamation is just a fancy legal way of saying gossip with consequences.
Yeah. Or yeah.
Why, you got one better?
I've not got a phrase like that that's better than yours.
All right, you can just go with the classic defamation. But what's interesting is Australia is often known as like the defamation capital of the world. Yeah, because our defamation laws are really strict.
Oh, I thought that was just everywhere. Sorry.
No, in Australia, like defamation is much much harder to argue against than in other places. And so we have a lot of defamation cases here in Australia. Now, this defamation case with regard to baby reindeer is happening in the US, but the reason that I wanted to talk about defamation is because thinking about Australia's, being the center of the defamation universe, recently there was also another case that happened earlier this year, and you will have definitely heard about it on the news if you're in Australia, but if you are not, there was a high-profile defamation case involving a political staffer, a man by the name of Bruce Lehrmann, who was accused of raping his colleague, Brittany Higgins, right? Now, this happened quite a long time ago in terms of these allegations came out amongst like a whole bunch of other allegations that were saying that sexual assault was rampant within the Australian political sphere. But it's back in the news again because at the time when Brittany Higgins made this accusation and it went to trial, it resulted in a mistrial, which meant that Bruce Lehrmann didn't face any consequences and Brittany Higgins wasn't able to get justice. This was obviously a really traumatic thing for Brittany Higgins, but Bruce Lehrmann then decided that as a result of this mistrial and the media storm surrounding it, that he had grounds to sue, in particular, Channel 10, which is one of our free-to-air TV channels, for defamation. Right? Now, it's very difficult to defend yourself, particularly in Australia, against a defamation suit. You either need to like prove that it didn't have any kind of consequences or that you didn't say it or that it didn't have an impact on their reputation, on the person's reputation. That's really hard to prove. So the best way to prove that, you're innocent in a defamation suit is to prove that the thing that you said was true.
Okay. When you say you, do you mean you're defending yourself against someone saying that you defamed them?
Yes.
Or, okay. Yeah. So if I said, Hannah, you're a silly goose.
Yeah.
Then I would have to say, no, but Hannah is a silly goose.
Yeah. Because if you said I was a silly goose and I made a suit off the back of the accusation of you calling me a silly goose has impacted my reputation significantly and I've lost, all this money and whatever damages as a result. You could either say I didn't say it or you could say this hasn't had really an impact on you. What are you talking about? Or that would be really hard, those two. The best way is to prove categorically that I'm a silly goose, which in this particular case between you and I wouldn't be that hard.
Take a look at that long neck.
Yeah.
That's aquaphobic feathers there.
I'm, as a goose, as silly as they come. But I'm not as much of a silly goose as Bruce Lehrmann because he sued Channel 10 for reporting on this case for defamation.
Yeah.
Now, in this particular case, the defendants, Channel 10, were able to prove that what they had said about Bruce Lehrmann raping Brittany Higgins was true.
Yes.
And what was really interesting about this case is that it was the justice that Brittany Higgins didn't get the first time. It was only through this defamation case that she was able to get, a ruling that said Bruce Lehrmann, in fact, raped her. Now, the judge ruled on the balance of probabilities that Bruce Lehrmann raped Brittany Higgins. And he said,
I'm sorry, but just that phrase.
Yeah.
Whoa.
It was a really liberating phrase and in a really difficult, horrible year, in particular for gender-based violence.
Yeah.
Just having this ruling was a step toward justice for not just Brittany Higgins, but for a lot of other people that had experienced similar things and, people that aren't men in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as he made this ruling, the judge said, having escaped the lion's den, Mr. Lehrmann made the mistake of going back for his hat. I know. Can you imagine a judge saying this?
Was that Judge Judy? Or?
No, this judge came up with this witty one-liner. And it's with that line that I want to enter Oscar Wilde. Did you ever like Oscar Wilde? Or did you ever go through like a kind of Victorian era steampunk phase where you liked dandies? Because I did.
I mean, that's just my life basically. But I probably did at some point when I was younger. I was like super into like all the Penguin classics. So I don't think it's the same. It's for some reason the picture of Dorian Gray is coming to my mind. Is Oscar like
He wrote it.
He wrote it. Okay. I was gonna say I feel like I have a misremembering of that. But no, okay, so he did write that. So I remember reading part of that. I didn't think I really finished it. I think I just read some for the vibe, but I don't know. Not really, like not in a historical sense. I think in a literary sense, I was kind of into it, into the vibe. But yeah.
I mean, I adored Oscar Wilde. He said famously, life's too important to be taken seriously. And I thought that that's the only inspirational quote that ever connected with me.
Yeah.
But it reminds me that everything is silly.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, some things are less silly than others. But this idea that silliness is really important, or making time for play, or making time to waste time as an important thing to do has always really stuck with me and is still something that I guess I really relate to.
Yeah.
So I loved Oscar Wilde, and this was, at a time I studied him, in high school. And the importance of being earnest, I think, is like one of the only genuinely funny like pieces of historical literature that I studied in school that I really liked. And I loved Oscar Wilde before I knew that I was gay, and before that I knew that he was gay.
Yeah, I don't think I ever got taught that to me saying that, but like I don't think I was ever taught that he was gay. To be fair though, I think this is like a humble flex. I think I did miss the Oscar Wilde period of like literature or whatever in school, of English in school, because I like skipped an English grade, and then I was just doing some like nerd shit. So I think I missed it, to be honest.
So you didn't okay.
So because I went straight to like Virginia Woolf and like who wrote Wuthering Heights? Emily
Bronte.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so jealous. I went to a girls' school and they made us study Legally Blonde. Legally Blonde is a great film, and I'm glad that I got to study it. But the reason that they did that was because they figured that would be the kind of text that a girls' school would want to study.
Ew.
And it's like, I don't want to ruin Legally Blonde with that. We were supposed to study Emma by Jane Austen, and then they just realized that we wouldn't pay attention, so they made us watch Clueless. Now, I'm not mad about that either, but having to write an essay on Clueless was clueless.
I mean, that's why you took media.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I've always liked Oscar Wilde. I've always found the things that he said really funny, and I loved Picture of Dorian Gray as well. But what's interesting is that we didn't learn that he was gay, which is funny because it was such a defining characteristic about him and his life.
Yeah.
And I'm about to tell you why.
Yay.
So his full name, and I'm going to give him his full name just because it's fun.
Okay.
Oscar Fingal O'Flattery Wills Wilde was born in Dublin in 1854.
Wow.
Yeah. So his parents were, I guess, progressive-ish, or I would say it's a contradiction in terms, mildly radical. I don't know if you could be mildly radical, but they were intellectuals, they were middle class, and his mother was a woman named Jane Wilde, and she was an Irish nationalist who participated in the 1848 Irish uprising against the British. So she was a staunch Irish nationalist, very anti colonial, the British colonial forces. She fought against that. And was kind of cool, and Oscar Wilde's dad also had kind of some liberal ideas for the time. They were well off, but Oscar Wilde did need to do further education on scholarship. So yeah, definitely a member of that like new middle class. And he went to Trinity College in Dublin, right?
Okay.
And his whole thing was languages. He was uniquely talented, which isn't surprising given that he grew up to be a writer, but he could speak English, German, French, Italian, and Greek.
Wow.
But, and this is kind of weird / ironic, he couldn't speak a word of Gaelic or Irish, which is just odd since his mother was such a staunch Irish nationalist and a big kind of belief system about standing up against the British colonial forces was the preservation of the Irish language.
Do you think that like Oscar was like, no, I don't want to speak Irish or Gaelic. I want to feel cultured, like I'm part of something bigger than just this small town.
I think that's basically verbatim what he said to his mother.
Except in an Irish accent, not in an English one.
The reason that he loved Greek and he learned Greek was because of the ancient Greeks, right? So and this goes into his sort of homosexuality and his intellectualization of homosexuality, was that he really harked back to the Greeks. That, obviously we're big on homosexuality, or at least at that time it was considered the highest form of love was between two men. So he went to Trinity and really thrived and became himself. Later he moved to Oxford and he sort of tried his hand at everything and was kind of weirdly good at everything. There are those people. He did lecturing. He wrote essays. He did interior design. He wrote poetry.
Sounds like you.
He is. This is what I mean. He's a kindred spirit. But he actually worked very hard for someone that would later become a dandy, which was the idea of kind of living your life as if it was a work of art. So he kind of stood for leisure time. Yeah. But what's ironic is that in order to get to this place where he was respected for these ideas on leisure time, he did work like very, very hard and he tried so many different things. And yeah, I feel like there's a lot of similarities between him and Anne Hathaway.
Do you mean Shakespeare's wife, Anne Hathaway, or Anne Hathaway, the star of The Devil Wears Prada?
The star of The Devil Wears Prada.
Why?
Well, because she got a lot of shit in the mid-2000s for being a tryhard because, she did like method acting and she was a really serious or tried to be a serious actor in an era where a lot of actors kind of were celebrated for being relatable it girls like Jennifer Lawrence.
I was going to say Jennifer Lawrence seems to have been critiqued for the same things that Anne Hathaway did.
Maybe at different times, but Jennifer Lawrence, she was like the real every gal that tripped at the Oscars and she just had it.
Well, see, I always saw Anne Hathaway as that relatable person because my start to Anne Hathaway, what's it called? Being a fan of Anne Hathaway was The Princess Diaries.
And with good reason, but she tried very hard. She worked very, very hard as a young actress. Wow. Anne Hathaway did. So I think, that's why I think of her. Whereas there were people that were in that 2010s kind of zeitgeist where Anne Hathaway was being laughed at because she was trying so hard and she hosted the Oscars. But then Jennifer Lawrence and people like Cara Delevingne were these kind of cool, chill girls that were getting the limelight. So that's why I'm thinking of Oscar Wilde, because now Anne Hathaway is flawless, impeccable, amazing. Everybody loves her again, but she did try very hard. And I wanted to say that while Oscar Wilde would later become the cool it boy, in a sense, at the very beginning, he worked very, very hard. So that's why it's important to try.
Okay.
But like none of these things, so like the interior design and the poetry and the essays and the lecturing and the writing of prose didn't really work for him. He was putting so much of himself into it, but not getting a lot of recognition. And so it was when he discovered aestheticism, which is a hard word to say and even harder one to spell, but aestheticism is an art movement, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like I know this because you say the word aesthetics a lot. So I'm just like telling you things you already know. Why don't you tell me what aestheticism is?
I mean, aestheticism is, it can be seen as a philosophy, but it's also like, it's basically the value of art and the value of beauty being like a form of like moral high ground. And like, right? You're shaking your head.
No, I'm shaking my head in disbelief at how well you articulated it.
Oh.
The note I had here is about prioritizing form over function, or art for art's sake is the like phrase that's often attributed to it.
Yeah.
But the movement evolved over the 19th century. And when Oscar Wilde found it, he got involved in that movement and he went to the USA, right? Where
Sorry, I don't know why. Oh my gosh, I found beauty. Where am I going to go? America.
Yeah, I'm telling you, that's what he did. He was like, oh my God, life is beautiful. I'm going to the new world. It was very that.
Yeah.
And, America at that time, was getting its own kind of scene. So he sort of went touring in 1882 and he was speaking, which is just something which I find so funny that people did in the past, where like you'd go and hear people speak just about whatever the hell they wanted.
Wait, isn't that literally what we're doing right now? Except it's like more accessible. Like, do you think that Oscar Wilde would have been a podcaster?
1000%.
He didn't need to try
and you're
all
right,
this.
that is exactly what we're doing right now, except for the time that you would just go into a cafe, or like not an actual cafe, but like I guess a place where people sat around drinking, or a bar or something like that, a pub, and you just like sort of stand on the table and start sharing your opinions.
Isn't that just like an open mic night at a comedy?
Essentially, but at least with a podcast, it's opt-in.
Yeah, true. I do. Wouldn't that be scary though? Just sitting there having like a nice little macchiato, and then someone stands up on the table and
Starts talking about aesthetics.
Yeah, it's like, I'll have you know that you are all heathens should you not value the art as art it is itself, and like saying like random.
I mean, as somebody that really aspired to be a beatnik as a teenager, like I think I'd probably have liked it, but I see now I would like it maybe less. But this is kind of in 1882 when he was in the US. This is where he became very well known as like the prototypical dandy.
Okay.
So a dandy is somebody that prioritizes leisure, and style above all else. It's the idea of kind of living a glamorous life regardless of how much like income you have to sustain that. And it's really just kind of posturing about, right? Okay. Thinking of yourself as an artwork, being seen.
Okay.
Is the point of a dandy.
New gender just dropped. Dandy. I'm like, that's the thing.
I think that I would love to be a dandy.
Well, yeah,
but not in today's time, because I'd have to, yeah.
Were you born at the wrong time?
No. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. You're a dandy. You can be a dandy.
Really?
If you know a dandy, send us a photo of them. There should be a dandy appreciation day.
Yeah.
So Oscar Wilde, right? Once he assumed his final form as the prototypical dandy, he returned to London, where he got married to a woman with a very stern sounding name, Constance Lloyd.
Constance Lloyd.
I feel like the name Constance needs to come back.
I love that. But what would the nickname be?
Connie.
Or
Stance.
Stance.
Stance is a cool name.
I would go Con for short. Then you got Stan, and then you got Cece.
Cece's cute.
Cece's like that's the real ones.
Cece's cute.
Yeah.
Well, Constance Lloyd, who I feel quite sorry for in all of this. She was an Irish children's book author, and they got married in 1884, so just after he returned from the United States. And throughout this, and this is like the first bit where Oscar Wilde, who was loved by so many and seen as like a gay icon, this is the first thing that I found where I'm like, what an asshole.
Yeah.
Right? So he had affairs with men throughout his relationship. This isn't what I think is an asshole thing. I think a lot of gay men didn't have another choice. And I think that that's, something that happened and had to.
Sure.
But he also wrote that he was finding himself revolted by his wife after her second pregnancy, which is so gross.
Oh my God.
Yeah. He was revolted by her body and her appearance.
He put that down on paper. He couldn't just keep it in his head.
Yeah, he put that down on paper.
Did he publish it?
I guess it was in his journals and prose and things like that.
Ew.
Letters and that kind of thing. I'd have to like go back and find exactly where this quote came from. But yeah, he did write it. I don't know if he like published it as a book or anything, but yeah, he did. And it's just so like, I feel like just such disgusting misogyny.
Don't say that about my CC.
Yeah,
come on.
Is Cece, and she's a children's book author, and she was the best.
Allegedly.
I don't know if she had any other problems, but the idea is that she like entertained the children. She was a writer, and she's cool.
He's just dogged
and
her.
he's just not only like cheating on her, but then decides to like put pen to paper instead of keeping it in his head that he was revolted by her after her second pregnancy that he caused.
And this is why we're choosing the bear.
Exactly. This is exactly why we're choosing the bear. So at this time, he was putting his thoughts into prose and essays, all right? So this is the 1884 period. He was writing a lot of, I guess you'd just say prose, which is just fancy sounding pieces about whatever he thought.
Yeah.
But he also wrote Picture of Dorian Gray here, which was a book that you liked. It's a book that I liked, and it's still a very popular story and play. And he was talented at this. He was also, weirdly, a socialist.
Okay.
And what made me feel really weird, because I was trying to reconcile this idea of somebody that would grow to kind of put himself above all others and sort of think that he shouldn't work in a sense or live as an artwork with like socialist ideals. He just doesn't feel socialist, but actually he was.
I mean,
in 1891, much later, he wrote an essay called The Soul of Man Under Socialism. Why this is interesting is because he hated charity, right? And I guess I've had this bias where I've always thought of like socialists or socialism as kind of caring for like the collective. And I was like, how can you be socialist and hate charity? But there's something in it, because the idea is that charity was a distraction from kind of taking down the structures that upheld the class divide.
Yeah.
So he said, and I'm going to read to you, the altruistic values have really prevented the carrying out of this aim, just as the worst slave owners were those who were kind to their slaves and so prevented the horror of the systems being realized by those who suffered from it and understood by those who contemplated it. So in the present state of things in England, the people who do most harm are the people who try to do most good while preserving the system. So he was really speaking out against the kind of altruistic, like the benevolent dictator or anyone that was kind of less bad while still participating in the system. And I'm reading this book at the moment called Babel by R.F. Kuang, which is amazing.
Is that
who wrote Yellowface?
Babel or the Necessity of Violence?
Yes.
Wait, is this about the tower? They're in a tower?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. I feel like Luke wanted me to read this book.
It's a dark academia classic, and I cannot agree with Luke enough.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Maybe I do need to read it. He's going to feel so bad. I'm going to go home and be like, I'm reading Babel. And he's going to be like, I told you to read that 2 years ago. You don't love me.
You can say, I'm finally reading Babel.
Yeah. And please don't listen to this one particular episode. No reason, not connected. Okay.
And I think what's interesting as well is, that's like a big theme of that book that I'm reading. But another part of this essay says, with the abolition of private property, then we shall have true, beautiful, healthy individualism. Nobody will waste his life in accumulating things and the symbols for things. One will live, and to live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist. That is all.
Hang on. I'm sensing a really big dichotomy in that passage that you just read. He's literally like, no one will care about things. No one will care about the symbol of things. I'm sorry, you with your art is art and art is better than everything else.
I know. Is that not just an amalgamation of symbols of things?
Yeah, literally, unless you look at everything and go, that's beautiful, and what is beauty? Nothing but being beautiful, which is reductive in the way that I said it, but like just as an argument. Like, unless you're taking that direction, which is very hard to do in practice, it's more of like a philosophy of thought rather than action. It's not practical. You can't live that way.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm getting angry now.
I would say that, what you're saying is that he's actually sort of severed his idea of beauty and detached it from the thing that is beautiful.
Yeah.
I feel like he probably could talk himself around that. What got me though was like true, beautiful, healthy individualism, because I guess the way that socialism exists, as separate from a communist regime, but the spirit of socialism that exists is all about the good of the collective over the good of the individual. So the sticking point for me was like healthy individualism. But reading it, he basically sort of believed that things like the class system, and if those structures were broken down, then everyone would be able to reach their true individual potential.
Okay.
So, there was a sense of socialism there.
Yeah.
At least, he stood for it in this essay.
Yeah.
So he wrote that in 1891, right? So 1891 was also the year that he was first introduced to Lord Alfred Douglas, who was affectionately known by his friends as Bosie.
Okay.
Cute.
Bosie sounds like a dog.
It's a great dog's name, right?
But surely there's a dog called Bosie out there.
I
like a
hope
like
there
a French
is.
bulldog.
Oh my.
Yeah.
No, they can't breathe. So Bosie was a poet. And so I don't know if you've heard the phrase, but it's a very famous phrase that is attributed, to homosexuality, or it's a phrase that is used to refer to homosexuality, the love that dare not speak its name.
No, I have not heard that before.
So Bosie wrote this idea of the love that dare not speak its name, or a hidden love, or a forbidden love, I guess he was referring to refer to homosexuality.
Okay.
Now, Bosie was a spoiled little brat.
Okay.
That's important to know. And so Bosie and Oscar Wilde began a very dramatic, explosive, and ironically, given the love that dare not speak its name, ironically not at all hidden affair. This was very outward.
Really?
Yeah, and Wilde had different affairs. Obviously, he cheated on his wife, but I think, there's one kindness in doing that then, with discretion. But with Bosie, he wasn't being discreet at all.
Oh my gosh. And so he's still with his wife and does he have kids?
Yeah,
No.
2 kids. The second one caused him to experience revulsion, apparently.
Oh my God. Oh yeah, that's right.
And so at this time, Bosie, he was a spoiled little brat, and Oscar Wilde loved to spoil him. And he was a spoiled brat because he was from a very wealthy family. And so it was this very kind of, I guess, quintessential daddy relationship that they had. So
Okay.
Oscar Wilde was daddy at the time. He was also writing plays. So at this point, he'd kind of found his niche. It wasn't interior design, wasn't prose, wasn't ancient Greek. It was writing plays. He has found his shtick. So when he started writing comedies of society, so that's Importance of Being Earnest was one of those, and also Lady Windermere's Fan, which was first performed at St. James's Theatre in 1892, right?
Cool. Okay.
At the premiere of Lady Windermere's Fan, Oscar Wilde is said to have asked all of his friends to wear a green carnation. This would go on to become a covert symbol worn by gay men to identify each other, particularly in France.
Yeah.
Even though it started in England, right? So a couple of years ago at the Met Gala, Elliot Page wore a green carnation. That was in reference to this.
That's cool.
So Oscar Wilde wanted all of his friends allegedly to wear green carnations because he thought it would be part of the artwork just to see pops of green. And his friends at this time were most likely affiliated with
A florist.
queer people. A florist.
Sorry.
It's true, most likely.
That's how they access these flowers. Don't worry, we've got a hookup.
Oscar Wilde and his queer friends of floristry wore their green carnations to St. James Theatre. Now, the reason that he went with green carnations, it's said that green carnations were unnatural, all right? And so he wanted attention. It's no secret that Oscar Wilde was an attention seeker. So a green carnation is unnatural. And what's interesting is how they were dyed green.
You put green dye in a cup and it goes, and then it goes all the way up to the flower.
That's exactly right, Rudy, but they didn't have green dye in...
They used beetles?
No.
What else is green? Plants. They used other plants.
They used other plants to dye a plant green?
Yeah, I don't know.
No, I'll tell you what they used. Arsenic.
What? Really?
Yeah,
Arsenic?
yeah. There's this particular type of green which was used at the time that was created with arsenic.
Oh,
So-
there was a paint that was also...
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Green
yeah,
paint. It was called arsenic green.
What is it called? I just watched a video on this the other
It's
day.
Paris green
Okay.
and Scheele green.
Yes.
So Scheele green was the big 19th century green color.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was made with arsenic. And so arsenic was used to dye these carnations green, which Oscar Wilde also would have likely loved because they were poisoned. So there's something very, very illustrious and dramatic about these green carnations and how they were made green. So they're unnatural. Homosexuality was sort of seen as that way, and Oscar Wilde, with his love of ancient Greece, sort of stood against that assumption, thinking it was natural and beautiful. But he sort of played with that with these arsenic poisoned, unnatural yet beautiful flowers.
Okay.
That is how it kind of took off as a symbol among gay men. But at this point, right, Oscar Wilde was a very successful man. He was making about £100 a week from his plays.
Wow.
Yeah, in the 1890s. Now, I used a inflation calculator to say that in today's terms, £100 a week is about £16,000 a week.
Wow.
Or 20,300 USD.
Wow.
A week.
What? How many plays was it? He did not pay his workers very well. I can tell you
I
that.
have no idea. He was clearing a bunch of cash, and he used that cash to buy his little bratty bottom Bosie, whatever the hell he wanted.
Wow. Okay.
Now, Bosie was also kind of a little, I don't even know what you call it. Bosie was a twink, okay? You can look at pictures of Bosie. Bosie was a twink, and he took Oscar Wilde into the underground rent boy scene, okay?
What's that?
So rent boys were sex workers, but yeah, young boys, basically, male sex workers. And Oscar Wilde would pay boys as young as 14.
Oi, okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Now, I do want to say that when we look at relationships with what we would now call minors throughout history, I think sometimes you have to look at the norms of the time.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you might look at the ancient Greeks where you look at like pederasty, and a pederastic relationship, right, could be, you know, it could be someone quite young with someone quite old, but in some ancient Greek societies, the age of like coming of age was at 20. So it could be, you know, someone who was like 17 or 18 with someone who was like maybe 24 or 25. That would still be considered pederastic. Not all of them were, but like that's some context. And in comparison, you know, young girls would be married off 12, 13, 14.
Yeah. Okay.
So when we talk about, oh my gosh, like the ancient Greeks were like, you know, having these relationships, how awful. Often we don't take into account that throughout most of history, like women, young girls have been married off as soon as they hit childbearing age.
Yeah.
But categorically, in 1885 or after 1885, the age of consent only ever applied to girls, but the age of consent was 16.
Okay.
So even by the norms of the time, this was not okay.
Yeah, no.
It was exploitative, and plus the fact that these rent boys, they were doing it because they needed money. That was a way that they could earn money. And he was a very, very wealthy man. So there was like a significant power imbalance. So I'm going to say that is a big L for Oscar Wilde.
It's not.
Like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter like the century that we're in. Assholes are assholes. And he was an asshole.
Yeah.
So the thing is he was so open and arrogant about it. He was not like trying to hide it. There was one person who was really, really outraged by it, right? And that was Bosie's father, who was a man by the name of John Sholto Douglas, who was the Marquess of Queensberry.
I have said that string of words many a time before.
Marquess of Queensberry, yes. Yeah, on social. But you know he invented modern boxing?
How?
Well, he came up with the game.
No shit, Hannah. Like, tell me how.
Well, I think boxing was, and this is like, I would need to fact check this more so, but boxing was a bit of like, it was certainly like a street sort of fight situation. And he kind of turned it into a noble British sport. Boxing's got a very British history.
I'm reading up on it now.
And what have you found?
So boxing is super, super old. People just love to hit each other. That's what I got to say first up. It's been seen in paintings, in Minoan art. Also in ancient Greece, there's also art on vases that depict a type of boxing. In terms of early London, records of boxing activity disappeared in the West after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, when the wearing of weapons became common instead of fighting in hand-to-hand combat.
Oh.
The sport later resurfaced in England during the early 16th century in the form of bare-knuckle boxing, sometimes referred to as prize fighting. And the first documented account of a bare-knuckle fight in England appeared in 1681 in the London Protestant Mercury, and the first English bare-knuckle champion was James Figg in 1719. And I believe there's a character in Bridgerton that is based off of that man.
Interesting.
In talking about Lord Douglas and his kind of lineage, I think obviously this guy was probably interested in placing bets on people to box and probably helped fund it in a sense. And probably just like went around like saying stuff like, "Hey, yeah, you heard that thing boxing? Yeah, I'm going down. I'm going down placing a bet on Joe later on."
So there was a set of rules that he came up with, which were the Marquess of Queensberry rules, also known as the Queensberry rules, which were then applied to boxing because he was interested. So
hang on, what gave him the audacity and the authority to start making up rules? Did he even fight?
I kind of think the thing that you just said, him walking around being like, here's a thing called boxing, but we should do it this way. This is my way.
This arcs me. As a former athlete, this really arcs me when people that don't even play the game can't come in, start wanting to make rules.
So, well, I mean, I think the idea was that like there was a bit of a sort of, he was trying to kind of clean up the sport a little bit. Like there were rules that he brought in which mandated the use of boxing gloves.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I think
as well, like the other thing is the rules of the competition rules, he kind of developed. So these prize fighters or these bare knuckle boxing rules, moved into kind of, I assume he probably funded boxing a little bit. And so he put on these games and kind of elevated it and got these prize fighters or these bare knuckle boxers to box by his rules. Now,
well, there you go.
I don't know what that means, but this guy was an asshole.
The dad?
Yeah. So he was like a big brutish asshole. He was one of the first people to use the word queer to refer to a homosexual man as a derogatory slur.
Yeah. God, really?
Yeah. So we have him to thank for that. So I guess we have boxing and the slur queer.
Wow.
From this guy. So he was busy, but he was furious because this Oscar Wilde and he was very famous, Oscar Wilde at the time. He was rich and famous off his plays, and he was masquerading around in the open. Actually, you can't masquerade
in the
he was getting around with his son.
Okay.
Right? Out in the open, and he was furious at the, what he was doing to the Douglas name.
So hang on. So he wasn't angry at his son, he was angry at Oscar.
Yeah. I mean, he was furious at the two, but he certainly like so many, I think, parents do when their child comes out or is seen to be queer and they're mad about it. They don't blame it on the child. They blame it on the person the child's with for leading them astray.
How dare you do this to my Bosie?
Exactly. So
corrupt him with sin.
And this is the funniest thing because this makes me feel like the Marquess of Queensberry, Lord Douglas, was a secret homosexual, because this is the campest thing I've ever heard.
Okay.
So he was like trying to destroy their relationship, right? And so at one point he was planning to attend one of Wilde's plays and throw a bouquet of rotten fruit onto the stage.
Oh my God.
Which just sounds like a slighted ex-lover of a gay person.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, but Wilde.
You're a boxer. Hang on. Now, hang on.
Yeah,
Wait. Roll it back. This guy's a boxer. He loves seeing other people get hit. He loves it. He's developed all of these rules around it. And he goes, how am I going to get back at this guy who's corrupting my son? I think I will throw a bouquet of, I was going to say frozen fruit, of rotten fruit at him.
I know. Hang on. Literally just hit him with a backhand, hitting with a left hook.
I mean, I guess, hang on, from a strategic point of view, I can see how this is a good option, because he can sneak in. He can blend in with the bouquet. Yes, it's rotten. Sorry, my florist got the boot this morning. We've moved to another one. John, don't worry. The florist is okay. Our reputation's fine. Don't worry about the fruit. Don't worry about it. Sits down. Now, he might not be first row. He might be in a box. He might be tooting his horn up in a box. You need a ranged attack for that. You cannot get hand-to-hand combat. So I can see how throwing an object would be advantageous in this situation. But still, it's very gay of him.
I know, it's so camp because he's obviously thought, what is going to, Oscar Wilde's there, the people there with their green carnations on. This guy reckons he's going to, play Oscar Wilde's game of floristry and throw this bouquet of rotten fruit. Now, here's the thing, though, because Oscar Wilde was tipped off by this grand plan of Lord Douglas.
I'm still caught up. Like
John Douglas.
How is he going to throw he has one shot to throw this freaking bouquet at this guy.
Yeah, but he has to get a bouquet of rotting fruit into the thing. Now, Oscar Wilde got tipped off about this and barred John Douglas's entry.
Okay.
So that sucks. So John Douglas is stuck on the side of the road.
It's called a stage door, baby.
Yeah.
Get to the stage door.
Yeah, and he's got his bouquet of rotten fruit. So he's like really upset. Anyway, he goes back and he starts rethinking. He's like, no, I've got another way to embarrass Oscar Wilde that makes me sound gayer than Oscar Wilde.
Okay.
He left a calling card, which is, I guess, like a business card.
Bring him back.
At one of Wilde's plays. Now, he wrote on it, for Oscar Wilde, posing sodomite, because he couldn't spell very well, and so that's how he spelt sodomite.
Oh, posing sodomite.
Yeah, so he wrote posing sodomite. He just spelled it incorrectly, which I find, like, again, camp. Sodomite just sounds even
It sounds
gayer.
French.
Yeah. So he did this. Now, Oscar Wilde, again, having this sort of pathetic calling card left for him. He's a very arrogant man, and he decides to sue the Marquess of Queensberry, his own lover's father, for criminal libel.
Hang on, but it was a calling card. It was a what? Hang on. So he goes, nah, this guy's defamed me. He's embarrassed me in front of all of these people. He hasn't. He's left a fucking card on your table, man.
I know.
What kind of ego do you have to feel like unjustly defamed from a fucking card on a table?
I know. And this is like a guy who's like prancing around London, having a very open gay relationship, taking rent boys into expensive hotel rooms, and then like writing horrible things about his wife. And then one guy suggests that he's a sodomite.
And posing, might I say.
Posing, so not even actually. And then he goes, this is too far. So this explains the ego of Oscar Wilde. And like, it's quite funny, this tit for tat game that they were playing, but like it does show that for somebody who was like so sassy, just like so offended and easily slighted.
Yeah.
And this was like a guy that, he really walked into these rent boys, right? And the reason, and I'll tell you how we know that this happened in a bit, but like he would take these rent boys and he would buy them things, put them up in hotels. But really at the end of the day, like he would have his own friend, like he might bring them up and then bring his own friends in.
Ew,
and
I'm
like,
sorry, no.
Again, just this sort of sense of power that he had.
Yeah.
Which is really quite revolting, was then, is now.
Yeah.
And so that type of behavior, and then like you said, a little card that says this absolutely sending him, it's just like, what are you doing? Now, homosexuality was illegal. It wasn't just sodomy that was illegal, but it was all kind of other acts, because this was after 1885 where the Labouche Amendment was passed, which criminalized all number of kind of same-sex relations between men. Oscar Wilde now, I want to hark back to the beginning of that judge in the trial talking about escaping the lion's den and going back for his hat. Oscar Wilde goes back for his hat.
Oh, no.
Yeah, goes back for his gorgeous dandy fedora. And so there was a trial where the Marquess of Queensberry needed to prove that his claim that Oscar Wilde was a sodomite was correct, which was resoundingly easy to do.
Okay.
All he needed to do was organise for a string of rent boys to take the stand and explain everything that had happened. Now, it's probably worth saying that we don't know whether or not he paid these rent boys, to say different things on the stand.
Yeah.
But I think we do have reason to believe that he was engaging with rent boys. That was all that was needed to prove that Oscar Wilde was guilty of gross indecency.
Yeah.
Which was under the 1885 Labouche Amendment. So he was sentenced to probably the worst thing that could be given to a dandy, 2 years of hard labour.
Oh, no, not for me.
In 1895, he was sentenced to 2 years of hard labour, and it's not funny, it killed him.
What?
It killed him. He became so unwell and withered and like just miserable and sick doing this hard labor. And it was hard labor. Like these were not good conditions.
No.
He actually hits the verge of death. And right before he dies, he writes probably the most incredible last words that anyone's ever written, which was, "My wallpaper and I are fighting a duel to the death. One or the other of us has to go." And it was him.
Oh my God.
So this aesthete, this is art for art's sake pioneer. His last words was to criticize the wallpaper of the infirmary where he died.
Oh my gosh. Talk about making light of a situation.
I know. And I think at the end of the day, like that's what people like about Oscar Wilde. He was really the first person in Western history to be famous for being famous.
He was the OG influencer.
He was the OG influencer. While he was talented, what people loved most was his antics and what he was going to do next. And he really was like the Kim Kardashian or like the Paris Hilton of the Victorian era.
He would definitely have had a podcast.
100%. And also like once he was sentenced, the kind of fascination and how widespread the pile on him was after, and this was like, he was very successful. People loved him. People loved his plays. That turned instantly once he was sentenced.
Yeah.
Even if it's not like he was hiding his queerness beforehand.
Yeah.
Right? But once he was sentenced and it was seen like the sentiment moved away from him, there was such a pile on, you know, in America, in Europe, in different countries. So it sort of makes him one of the earliest victims of cancel culture.
Yeah.
And so he was cancelled. Like he was someone that was very, very powerful and then had that power stripped away and sentiment turned against him and he was candled.
He was candled.
And he was candled. And that is a little known punishment, a candling.
Yeah. You're sentenced to making hand-rolled beeswax candles.
Which you would have hated.
He would have hated that. He would have called that hard labor.
And much later, after he died, he was posthumously pardoned.
Oh.
Which happened.
Did they go to his grave and just whisper like,
"You're okay.
You're okay. You're uncancelled"?
Basically, they called it Turing's Law. So Alan Turing was also sentenced under the Labouche Amendment. But in 2013, Alan Turing and 50,000 convicted gay men were pardoned for the crime of homosexuality.
Wow.
And so, yeah, Oscar Wilde, while sentenced for gross indecency, he was later pardoned in 2013, pretty recently. And I think that it was a win for so many men that had faced prison sentences and had their like livelihoods ruined by gross indecency charges. It was a real win. And I think we do put Oscar Wilde up on a pedestal because there's so much that's fascinating about him and there's so much that's funny and fun and camp and like, I don't know, you kind of do root for him in so many ways, but he does get a bit flattened, like so many queer figures of history. And there were some parts like of him that really epitomized misogyny. And I think our community still struggles with like gay male misogyny. And I say he was a pioneer of that too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's multifaceted, really multifaceted kind of human. And I don't know, that's the thing.
Actually, I need to specify.
What?
When Turing's Law was passed, this is like just me being like, I'm being really specific.
Sure.
Turing was royally pardoned in 2013 specifically, but it wasn't until a couple of years later that they passed a law that pardoned all of the other gay men.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why I needed to add that really specific technical note.
Well, I don't know, just in case someone wants to be specific, that's fine. I think people do, like, there's the Oscar Wilde person and then there's Oscar Wilde cultural idea. Like, what did he give to culture?
Yeah.
And the thing that culture has taken is that sort of aestheticism. It's that opinion on art. It's the opinion on like literary. It's like his literary works. It is just, I think, like I guess a fault of culture lifting up things that are really good and like us running with that, in that you do kind of, you know, the bad things do kind of fall away. And it is one of those things. It's like, okay, like, you know, at the time, like people should have probably been cancelling him had ideals been different for his misogyny and for his like bad actions towards younger men and his wife and whatnot. It is interesting what people get cancelled for and what they should really be cancelled for.
Yeah, and if that changes, like I'd be interested in the kind of people that have been cancelled, you know, post Me Too, whether or not the things that they should have been cancelled for changes into the future, like in a century's time. But I also just think when we lift people up and become obsessed with them, I think we do them a disservice by also not giving space or creating space for them to be fallible, flawed humans. And while I'm not saying that we need to forgive the like shit that people do to each other, I think we shouldn't be acting shocked. You know, like when we think of who's recently, Lizzo, for example, she was so pedestaled for being this incredible sex positive, body positive, you know, amazing progressive icon. And then the allegations came out that, you know, she created a toxic work culture where there was like sexual harassment and all these other things. And while that's not okay and shouldn't be excused, I just can't think of anybody that doesn't have parts of them where they're an asshole. Obviously, I'd like to say there are people that don't, I don't know, sexually harass other people, but I think we just make the wrong assumptions when we're like, that person is amazing and they now represent all of this, and then we get so shocked and disgusted when they then don't live up to the picture we've painted of them.
Well, I think it is the living up of it that it's like the issue. Because I feel like it is difficult when idolization in it of itself is like the act of like almost naively turning a blind eye to like parts of someone that you might not want to accept. And so it is funny, like, when you do think about the shock and the horror that people kind of go through when someone who is otherwise contributing good to the world does something horrific or does something that really is not by anyone's standards a good thing. How do we reckon with that? Because like often we like idolize people because they are people that we want to take from and learn from and sort of be in a way. And so it is hard to go, oh, well, how can I idolize this person and want to take from them if they do this bad thing? And the fact is, like, if they do something good, you can still take the good thing, but you can also still say they're a shit person. Yeah. Because I think it's like, hey, that person's really good at showing representation and I really see myself in them, you know, because we come from similar experiences. But I also understand that there is a ceiling to that idolization because they did this god awful thing that I just know for sure is bad. Yes. Like, you know, and that's why like I don't idolize anyone because I'm like, why do I want to fall into like that sort of like mindset or fallacy? I don't want to, I just don't go there personally. Yeah.
It's how I felt when Drew Barrymore crossed the picket line in the writer's
strike. You were
strike.
Literally beside yourself. And you were shocked. See, I don't want to ever be that.
I don't want to feel that. I don't want anyone to feel that.
I have enough things to be shocked about. They are discovering shit at the bottom of the ocean every single goddamn day. I don't need anything to be shocked. I don't need any more shock in my life. That's enough. That's why I just don't go that far. Actually, no, I take that back. If Jack Black ever did anything awful, I don't think that I would need to rethink my whole.
Would you love him anyway?
I just don't think I would be. I don't think that I could engage in the same way. I think I would be forever changed if he came out in some massive horrible thing. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be keen to know. Let us know, who would you be the most devastated about if you found out they'd done something terrible? And we're going to make that a little question box on the Spotify Thank you so much for listening to me talk about Oscar Wilde and defamation, aka gossip with consequences.
I loved it. Thank you. It was a great story. So dramatic.
I know.
So gay at every turn.
Every turn.
Yeah. No, but yeah, it's a good story. I didn't know that carnations were made green at the time from arsenic. Do not do that at home. Not that I would know where to get arsenic from and be able to give you that part of the process, but just don't do it. Just use some green dye. That's what I'm contributing to this episode.
Yeah.
Don't use arsenic.
Somehow not that surprised that what you're contributing is some safety information.
Yeah, neither am I. But hey, thanks for joining us this week on the show. We love having you here. And if you want to continue being part of the community, head on over to our Discord, have a little rabble about in there. And if you feel like it, there is a free paid. No, that's not how it works. There is a free tier that you can join on Patreon, which allows you access to some exclusive content every now and again then too. So yeah, head on over there. But otherwise, Hannah, do you want to send us out?
I do. So I want to leave you all with another piece of inspiration, just as sound as life's too important to be taken seriously. And that is, not everything is gay, but there's gay in everything, including the founder of modern boxing, allegedly.